with more than half of the staff of real estate businesses being sent to furlough, at least in the United Kingdom,
Yeah.
sales are going down, viewings are seized altogether. So you can't rent a property right now. You can't really buy. You can, but it's really hard, and nobody is doing that.
Mm.
So how do you see coronavirus affecting the property market, and what are the potential implications for the real estate in short and long term if restrictions will not be lifted until June 2020?
Okay. Well, it's a good question. Again, I think it will vary somewhat country to country, but in general, the biggest risk for the property market is default, right? So default in retail and or commercial, and that is not clear what the level of defaults will be. So in certain countries, the governments have put moratoriums on rental payments. It is not clear when those will be lifted, what funds will have to be returned, whether the governments will help in any cases. But it's important to understand there are knock-on effects. In many cases, landlords have mortgages to pay. If they don't get rental income, there's a cycle that is created that is unhealthy. So I think fundamentally, the defaults depend on two things. They depend on the length of time that this takes. So back to the phases, if we can successfully get to a place where people are back to work, people, to go to your point, can go look at properties and rent properties, because if everybody is isolating at home, they can't do anything. So how quickly we can move into that next phase, and what the government approach will be to rental payments, moratoriums, and so on. The commercial space, so far, office space seems to be okay, but that again will depend on the timing. But retail will be hit very, very hard, very hard, for a couple of reasons. One, because businesses will not be able to get back up and running, as I mentioned, and so that will free up a lot of space. And secondly, because of what we both talked about, this secular trend to online business over time. Which was already happening, by the way, so it's not a new trend. Okay, so I think we have to just watch the space. We have to hope that the next phases can kick in and we can get back to some sort of a more normal place. What I will say as an aside, for those listening that have real estate investments or work with advisors that are invested in real estate, it's an important time to review and to try to understand where you are. Again, you mentioned earlier, I work closely with a firm here called Global Gate Capital. I think they do a great job. And they have a large real estate portfolio, and the approach has been to do a bottoms-up review, tenant by tenant, to basically figure out what the risks are. And there's no other way around it, because at the top down, there's what the governments do and so on, and what the macroeconomic situation does. But then there's the bottoms up, and you can't avoid that. So anybody out there that is invested in real estate needs to make that analysis and look at, what properties do you have? If they're commercial properties, who's staying in them, and what are the risks there? And just to say, the analysis today of the corporate market is very complicated. It harkens back a little bit to 2008, because there's so much interconnectedness between companies. So you may look at one company that's either a tenant or a company you invest in and decide that that company is solid and that company is sound. But it may be that they have suppliers or they have clients that are not. And so even if they are sound and their balance sheet is in good shape and their business proposition works, they may get hit with external forces that disrupt their business and go against their viability. Yeah. So I think that's why, and again, if this is clients that have businesses, I mentioned this in the checklist, it's important to do a review of suppliers and supply chains, because in very strange ways, supply chains that these days tend to be more international, if not global, can be easily disrupted. If there's claims on assets, you can have patents that wind up in bankruptcy courts and frozen, and then suddenly products cannot be produced. So I think it's very important, and a very sad example of that is the production of ventilators globally, where we've learned how complicated it is to get parts in the midst of a pandemic from different locations based on different scenarios. So I think we need to really be cognizant of those things and do a proper analysis.